At Maverick Public Relations, growing your influence is their specialty. NPR works with remarkable companies in the cannabis industry to deliver exceptional results. Experience big agency expertise and outstanding client service delivered by seasoned and knowledgeable experts. Connect with Maverick PR today and move your company to the next level. Visit them today at www.themaverickpr.com.
From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Podcast. Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. Now, here's your host and bud tender, Gary Johnston.
All right, that's the only reference I'm going to make to Christmas 2020. I do have a Santa suit, and I have been known to play Santa on occasion. And I guess not surprisingly, I popped into a couple of Zoom family calls over the Christmas holidays. I also did a Toastmasters meeting before Christmas. I got a chance to use the suit a little bit. What a weird Christmas, huh? Weird. Well, I hope you had a chance to spend some time with the people in your bubble, and hopefully only the people in your little bubble. And I sure hope by the time Christmas 2021 comes around, we've all had our inoculations for the vaccine for COVID-19, and we're in a different world. All right, that's the last of the references to what's just we've gone through. Let's talk about what's happening today in episode 61 of the Cannabis Podcast. Well, we have a feature interview for you this week, and that interview is with Jaclynn Pehota. Jaclynn is the Executive Director of the Association of Canadian Cannabis Retailers, known as ACCRES. We were introduced to them a number of weeks ago, I guess, with one of the episodes when Corey Waldron, the CEO of Mood Cannabis in Nanaimo, first introduced us to ACCRES. Continuing to acknowledge what they're doing, they're doing some fabulous work, and Jaclynn is going to be talking about the current state of cannabis in Canada and specifically in BC, and some exciting news about what is coming up in 2022. Stay tuned for that, because you are going to be excited about that as well. We'll be done with the pandemic by then, right? Now, along with that feature interview, we're going to wrap it with a couple of other stories. How about a story that says our government thinks we're growing too much medical weed at home? And believe it or not, in some parts of BC, there is still no easy access to legal cannabis. All of that and more is coming your way on episode 61 of the Cannabis Podcast. Now, this is a weird story out of Reuters, and it's about growing cannabis at home. Apparently, Canadian health regulators think people are growing too much pot at home, or more specifically, too much medical marijuana. Canadian health regulators on Thursday raised concerns about the large quantity of medical marijuana people were growing at home, after its data showed a significant jump in daily average production permitted by healthcare practitioners. While the practitioners can allow registered patients to grow limited amounts at home for personal use, the regulators' findings show that such authorizations rose to a staggering 36.2 grams by the end of March, compared with 25.2 grams in October 2018. It's only an additional 11 grams, not a whole lot. Meanwhile, average purchases by registered patients who can buy pot from licensed producers and federal medical sellers have stayed as low as 2 to 2.1 grams every month, data showed. That seems perhaps a bit unrealistic. An early review of the data signals to me a striking difference in the average amounts prescribed per day in the two different channels, said Deepak Anand, Chief Executive Officer of Materia Ventures. With no concrete limits on personal production, Health Canada is facing rising pressure to tackle the perceived abuse of the home grow program. Health Canada is concerned that high daily authorized amounts are, in a few instances, leading to abuse of the Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes framework and are undermining the integrity of the system, the regulator said. CBC News reported here in October that the Ontario Provincial Police raided dozens of illegal cannabis grow operations between July and October, a majority of which had personal production authorization. It remains unclear if we are dealing with systemic issues as opposed to targeted ones, as a result of the tremendous pressure the regulator has fallen under recently by provincial and municipal governments, Anand said. Health Canada's findings shows 43,211 individuals were allowed to grow marijuana for their personal medical use by the end of September, and 377,000 plus were registered as patients. So there's an interesting perspective on the state of medical marijuana grows across our country, and the fact that only a couple of grams a month are being purchased from licensed producers may indicate that there's an awful lot of medical marijuana being grown at home.
From the cannabis-infused studio in the clouds, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
And now I'm really pleased to introduce our guest for our feature interview for today. Jaclynn Pehota is the Executive Director of ACCRES, the Association of Canadian Cannabis Retailers. And they are a nonprofit, member-driven industry association whose goal is to serve as a positive, proactive advocate to protect and expand business opportunities for the private cannabis retail industry. And I want to thank Corey Waldron, the CEO of Mood Cannabis in Nanaimo, for connecting myself with Jaclynn and getting the interview arranged. And in fact, we're going to pick up the interview just after I have introduced Jaclynn and asked her to explain to us what ACCRES is all about.
ACCRES is was actually founded out of another association, which was the Canadian Association of Medical Dispensaries. That organization was founded in 2010 as a response to the kind of increasing prevalence of storefront access for medical cannabis prior to legalization. So that organization worked really closely with City of Vancouver in their work in pre-legalization, creating land use surrounding medical dispensaries. And, when Justin Trudeau made his announcement, Prime Minister, he dropped that on us like a bolt of lightning. And I don't think anybody quite saw that.
It's true. It was pretty surprising, wasn't it?
It really was. It was like, oh my goodness. My personal, history with cannabis, I was actually working to have cannabis decriminalized provincially. And everybody always said, that's ridiculous. It'll never happen. You're a crazy lady. And then suddenly it's like legalization. And whoa. So anyway, when that happened, a group of retailers said, this is something that they wanted to participate in. So they're going to move away from, medical access towards recreational, private retail. And so they founded ACCRES. So we are a registered nonprofit in the province of BC. We are governed by a board of 7 volunteers. And I've been working with the organization since January 2020. So we're just coming up on a year now.
Excellent. And what's been your biggest accomplishment to date?
Well, I think our biggest accomplishment today is definitely getting our regulators to commit to direct supply in 2022. So currently, our retailers are obviously forced to buy strictly and solely from a centralized distributor. Right. That's the Cannabis and Liquor Distribution Branch here in BC. Mm-hmm. And so what we said was, okay, centralized distribution has some benefits. And we recognize that those benefits are, something that perhaps small and independent cannabis retailers want to continue to take advantage of. But the problem with the centralized distribution model is that it makes it very difficult to own your own identity as a retailer. So, when other people are making decisions about purchasing kind of on your behalf, you lose that ability to really stand out based on your personal relationships or what have you. So what we posited to our regulators was, what if we had a hybrid system? So what if, in order to foster the sector in British Columbia in a holistic kind of way, we said that producers who are, under a specific script or Indigenous owned and located in BC, what if our private retailers could create supply relationships directly with those kinds of businesses? Mm-hmm. And the province said, that sounds like a great idea. Let's implement that in 2022.
Well, that is a huge piece of news. Excellent. Good work on that, Jaclynn.
Oh, it was a very exciting announcement. I mean, it's, we come from, a lot of folks who have licenses now did transition from the unregulated market. There's people who never functioned in that market, but we do have a significant number of folks who transitioned. And the thing that made that unregulated market so vibrant was those individual relationships. It was really kind of integral to the culture. And I think that it will be nice to reintroduce that element back into, the consumer's experience in a regulated way.
Absolutely. So does that mean that in 2022, the craft growers are going to be able to sell directly to the retail? Is that the idea?
That is the idea. That's exactly it.
Oh, that is fabulous.
We are so excited.
Yeah,
this is it's something that, when we heard, they did a press release prior to them dropping the writ from this last election. And it was a bolt from heaven, kind of. And I got a phone call from the gentleman who was driving the policy, and he said, Jaclynn, we're so excited to work with you on this. And so we're really looking forward to making sure that the policy looks like what everybody wants it to. So it benefits, small growers and independent retailers.
Well, and absolutely. And it gets to the heart of the heritage of this province, for God's sakes, with BC Bud.
100%.
Yeah. Oh, that is fabulous news. Thank you for sharing that, Jaclynn. So what other key initiatives is ACCRES kind of looking at as you head into 2021? What are the things that you want to work on next?
Oh my goodness. How much time do you have? We've got, there's a bit of a list. There's a couple of things I think it's kind of obvious that are really, holding the economic potential of the sector back. One of those is the marketing regulations. It is a very trying thing. It is a situation that I don't think that there are many other industries that cope with this, but not being able to express to the public, what your stock looks like or how much it costs. That makes being a retailer very challenging. And it also makes it really difficult for us to convert consumers into the regulated system. That is a challenge that we've been facing in BC. We were lagging a little bit in terms of the conversion of the consumer, and there's a lot of very good reasons for that. But one of them is, you can't tell anybody what's going on in the regulated market. And that means that it's tough, right? Everybody else gets to advertise. And, at ACCRES, we feel like this is a legal substance. It's adult use. But we think that, there are responsible ways that we can tell the public about the product that we sell. And that, those regulations, they need to loosen. And I totally understand that, there was this impulse to over-regulate because this is very new. Canada was the first country in the world to undertake this marvelous project. But, we've seen that there's not we were 2 years in, the repercussions of legalization have not, there's no fires on street corners or any of those things.
Exactly. None of that happened, which was, prophetic in terms of what they said we were going to face.
Well, even there was a doctor, a very prominent doctor, I believe he was the head of the College of Surgeons, who was just virulent, very outspoken adversary of legalization. He was positing that there was going to be all sorts of, like I said, fires on the streets and all this nonsense was going to go down. And then he actually recently published an opinion piece retracting that statement. I think it was in November that he put it out there and said, I was wrong. The sky didn't fall. Everything seems to be going fine. If that gentleman, that opponent can kind of come around on this, I think it would be kind of nice for us to start looking at cannabis as an economic opportunity as opposed to a problem that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. And well, good on him for having the character to reverse himself, to admit that. I wish just more people would do that. And it would be a lot easier for us to get a whole lot of this stuff done.
That is the truth. The stigma that the industry carries is real. It still remains. There's, I call it the giggle factor. It's unfortunate. This is a massive economic block of activity that, we could be capturing, that we are developing. It isn't funny, it's serious. It's a serious, opportunity. It's especially a serious opportunity for British Columbians. This is our market to own, right? And what we need is the tools to do that. And I think that is, that's another focus that we have is, trying to encourage the regulators to see the opportunity and to give us the room that we need as a sector to really realize the potential.
Yeah, they to admit we sell cannabis and to be able to promote that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, like I said, it's an adult use substance, and we're, I love a drink as much as the next girl, but there are a lot of, social ills that come along with alcohol consumption that we haven't seen the same things materialize around cannabis.
Yeah, that's right.
In a legal kind of framework. So I think it's important to consider those things,
I agree.
As we learn.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, Jaclynn. With the regulations that are happening right now in BC, what's currently, are there any changes forthcoming other than the one you talked about in 2022 before we get there?
I think we're going to see some significant investment on the part of the province in the development of the sector, which is great. I think that that's something that we are really, kind of been sorely lacking is, the fostering of the sector the way that it could have potentially been kind of more, I don't know, more funding options maybe from the province, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of challenges surrounding accessing capital for small cultivators that I hope to see addressed in the coming year. And then stuff that we're pushing for. I think that there is going to be not provincially, but maybe some changes at the federal level that are going to have a significant impact, not so much on the retailers, the private retailers, but rather more on the production side. Health Canada recently announced that they're undertaking quite an accelerated review of several sets of regulations of the Cannabis Act surrounding microcultivation and nursery licensing, et cetera. So that is a heartening thing for us because I think that there are a lot of regulations that are kind of preventing BC from realizing its full potential.
Yeah, and has there been any noise from Health Canada about reviewing the dosage for edibles and revising that at any time in the future?
I mean, they are going to be opening the Act for review in 2021, I believe towards the end. So they're going to be re-examining because there's a report that is due to Parliament after 3 years on the state of the Cannabis Act. I hope that they will open that up because, I mean, I can't say that I'm confident, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, as a retailer, I mean, that's the thing that I face the most is the people who have... Because regardless of where they got it, prior to legalization or even after legalization, they're dealing with dosages 2, 3, 4, 5 times as high as what the legal limit is, and so they just walk, because they can still get it somewhere else.
And if you do the math on the cost of the cannabinoids and the edible products, it's like $300 a gram for you know what I mean? That is a lot. I was joking with somebody the other day, don't bother bringing Cristal to a party. Bring legal edibles because, then you can say it's worth $300 a gram. And that is a problem, right? I mean, especially for a public that is relatively sophisticated, especially in BC, right? It prices a lot of people out of the market. That's the thing. And, when we fail to, give regulated access in communities or we're not dealing with reasonable dosage limits, you are unfortunately creating a scenario where you are funneling people back into unregulated sources.
Totally. And that's when I really feel that they are keeping the black market in edibles alive with that 10 milligram limit on packaging.
Yes, I think that the thing is, my other analogy is I can walk into a liquor store right now and buy enough alcohol to kill me and everybody I know, and they will smile and take my credit card and give me a receipt, and I'll walk out the door. And nobody is going to stop me. And nobody is saying I'm too stupid to know not to drink. You know what I mean? That is something that we give credit to the public for. And I mean, I realize that comes with experience because lots of people have been, socially imbibing alcohol far longer than potentially cannabis or whatever. But I mean, it really is kind of gets to that point where you have to trust adult people Absolutely. To, know their limit and play with it.
Yeah, it's absurd. I mean, the 30-gram limit of, for retail sales per visit, it's, again, as you say, you can buy as much alcohol as you want and try to buy more than an ounce in one visit, and you can't do it. It's insane.
And and the silly thing is, if you live across the street from a retailer, you can go and you get your 30, go put it in your house, go back to the store, get another 30 grams, go back to the, you can do that as many times as you want to.
Well, I know. And we have customers doing that. Yeah, because they want to get their cannabis, and they see it as just kind of getting by the regulations, which are kind of silly in the first place.
Well, and the thing is, it's also bad for the environment. Think about what encouraging people to make multiple trips to the same, retail location means. That's not great for the planet.
Yeah, it's very true. And you mentioned one thing in the regulations, and that has always bothered me too. Certainly in the retail market, people are always asking us for prices. And that just seems like an absurd part of the legislation that we can't even talk about prices over the phone.
Well, and that's the rationale for that is that you can't age gate over the phone.
Yeah, I know that's rationale.
But what I would say is, I mean, realistically speaking, what harm is it if honestly, if you were to tell a minor accidentally the price of, cannabis, what are we risk mitigating here? You know what I mean? Like, what is really going to happen if that happens? I mean, how frequently is that even at issue? Like, how many 16-year-olds are calling the legal dispensary to check on pricing?
What are the repercussions for it? And
that's exactly.
And I have had customers vehemently angry with me and declare that, well, they're going to go to another store then if I won't give them the price, and they simply don't understand that it's not our choice.
Well, and one positive thing is now, because, part of the work that we did at ACCRES was, really pushing in the first wave of COVID to have online sales available to the private retailers. So, online payments, putting your menu on what we did at ACCRES was actually we recruited the municipalities. So we took a letter around to various municipal governments saying, listen, these businesses in your community want to do the responsible thing when it comes to mitigating COVID exposure, et cetera. Like, they can't offer these services to their customers. We would like you to support our ask to the government to allow for them to do that. And we actually were able to get, I think it was 42 municipalities to send letters into the Solicitor General asking that these measures be implemented. Because, I mean, that's the one positive thing is, if you can refer to somebody to the internet now, they can look at your prices on the menu online through that indicator. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take into consideration, though, people who don't have access to the internet.
No, which is often the response you get. Well, I don't have access to the internet, so that doesn't help me, does it?
Yeah, and that's a problem. It was the same reason that in the medical system, when they could only take credit cards to order the product, that was a problem for medical access. You know what I mean? Like, there are people who don't have the privilege of credit cards on the internet. They just are.
Have you found with the reinvigorated NDP government now with a majority and kind of looking at things differently that there's been more? You mentioned earlier that they're talking about some new initiatives. Do you think that's because they feel they're more in power to kind of lead the way?
Yeah, I think that at this point, especially post, with COVID and its impact on the economy, like I suspect that, elected officials are not, they would like to see, as much economic growth as they can possibly foster. And I think that, the circumstances make people it accelerates the getting over the stigma if it really does represent significant economic activity to capture. So I think that is a big part of this. I think that also as, legalization unfolds and we don't see any negative repercussions, we'll start to see, champions for the industry and the sector in, elected officials who are from communities that, this is very important to the community and their economic well-being. I think that's going to become more and more part of the conversation as we move forward. And I think that's a positive thing because, the realistically speaking, this is something that is fueling British Columbia right now, whether or not it's regulated.
It's true. It's true. May as well admit it and just move on from there, right?
Precisely. And that's it, right? Like, we have to say, okay, this is the reality and this is where we want to be. So how do we get from the reality that we have now to where we want to be in a way that's actually going to be effective? Yeah,
exactly. Has ACCRES looked at the issue that is all around the province with all the great market stores that are out there that are selling the edibles at much more than 10 milligrams and anything? Is that something that you guys have looked at?
It is. It's something that we've engaged both with the CSU, so the Community Safety Unit is the group that is responsible for the enforcement of the BC cannabis regulations, and then we've also engaged with the Attorney General and a couple of other people to have a conversation. But our focus has really, honestly, been more on a thrust towards public education. I mean, the edibles situation aside, I think that there is a lot of confusion on the part of the public about what legalization of cannabis, like what that means to them and how there was not a lot of communication on that. of anybody through this whole process, unfortunately. And so what we said to the province was, you need to tell people why accessing cannabis through the regulated system is a social good. You need to explain that to folks, because there is a long history of unregulated access in BC. And right now we're not doing as much as potentially we could do to drive changes in that consumer behavior. And so the only positive way that I can think of is to, educate the public, because enforcement is unfortunately, it's a hydra, right? Like if enforcement was effective on, the real talk, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because cannabis wouldn't be legal, because enforcement would have worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, they're not going to enforce them out of business. It's not going to happen.
It's not. We need to, like I said, we need to drive changes of consumer behavior. And the other thing is that we really need to find a way to transition the production in this province into a regulated framework, because retail is just, it is the face of a larger market. And and the thing is, when we play whack-a-mole with these unregulated storefronts, you could shut them all down and then they just end up on the internet, right?
Absolutely, and then, as they have done. Yep.
As they have done. And unfortunately, the unregulated market is, fortunately for them, they don't have the same strictures. They don't have to follow any of the rules or what have you. So they're a lot faster when it comes to adapting. Yeah, but they're a lot faster when it comes to adapting to, enforcement type actions. And the other thing is, the tools that you have available to you, like if you're, fining people or whatever, that might be the cost of doing business for those operations.
Yeah, for many it is. They just accept it, pay the price, and move on, because the rest of it makes sense to them. Yeah, precisely.
And so I think that, in the tidal wave of legalization is an inevitability. Like legalization is the future. It's not going to go anywhere.
It's here. It's not going to go away.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a matter of how long do we continue in this, in this transition. I would like to see it be a faster, less painful transition, as opposed to something that is protracted and drawn out and, not a benefit to anybody in the province.
Yeah. That makes sense, Jaclynn, to have some benefit for maybe lots of people instead of no benefit for any.
Well, and that's the point. That's the beautiful thing about legalization, is that it, has the potential to really, invigorate the economy in a way that is really sustainable. Cannabis is not only, it's not only a fun lady to hang out with when you're chilling out, or, to help you when you're sick, but it's also a carbon sink. You know what I mean? Like when you're growing these plants, it's like it's carbon sequestering. And then, the biomedical potential of the plant is incredible.
Astronomical, the possibilities there. Yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating. Well, that actually kind of nicely leads me into the transition, Jaclynn, to ask you my hot seat questions. Since you just kind of talked about, the wonders of this wonderful plant and how we enjoy it. I'm assuming, and let me ask the question, you are a consumer of cannabis?
I'm an inveterate snob when it comes to cannabis. So, unrepentant. She's a beautiful lady, and I love her.
Good. I suspected as such, but I always like to make sure. So what would be your favorite cultivar?
Well, that's a tough one. In our house, Congo gets a lot of radio play.
Okay.
But if I had to pick like the strain that sings to me and brings me where I need to be from a sleepy time perspective, because that's actually my favorite application of cannabis, is a strain called Lindsay OG.
Lindsay OG.
Yeah, from Lindsay, Ontario. It is a heavy hitting indica. It smells like diesel and coffee and chocolate. Nice. It's a beauty.
Sounds nice. Okay. Do you prefer joints or vape?
I'm a joint girl.
Okay.
All the way. Yeah.
All the way. And when you're high, do you have a favorite munchie?
You know what? I enjoy a honey roasted peanut.
Okay. Those are always tasty.
I have also been known to raid the dark chocolate pile. So.
As many have before you, and many behind you as well. Do you prefer edibles or flower?
I'm not going to. Don't make me pick a favorite child. I think
Good response.
recreational use, like for the fun and good times. I'm a flower. Like I would smoke, but for for snoozy times, edibles all the way.
Okay, good. See, that's the first time I've had that response. So I appreciate your candor on that. And do you have a particular name for a running joint?
I do not, actually.
Okay. There's been a few that have come up over the course of the podcast. Canoe is the most popular one. White Rabbit is out of Quebec. And then one guy just said, running joint. That's what I call it.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I call it a running joint.
Yeah. And the other one that I find interesting, just with the differences across our country, and I think I know the answer to this one. So are you a BC girl?
I am, yeah.
Okay. So I think I probably know what you call 3.5 grams.
An 8?
Yeah, see, exactly. So that's what it is in BC. As soon as you hit Ontario, it becomes half a quarter. When you hit Quebec, it's 3.5. And then there's another term that I can't remember right now out of Newfoundland. So, and I find it fascinating, just across the country, the same thing can be referenced in so many different ways.
I love the fact that the French refuse to go imperial. Like, they're like, no, 3.5. Like, go all metric all the time. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I appreciate that. Well, I thank you so much for your time, Jaclynn, and telling us all about what ACCRES is up to in your role as the executive director. If you had an opportunity to tell the world what you think the future of legal cannabis should be, what do you think you'd say?
I think the byword here is local. I think that is the thing that, really made BC special in the unregulated market and can make us shine in the regulated market. This is, it's a product that has a shelf life and local and small scale and sustainable. I think that's the future of the industry.
Excellent. We will leave it there. Thank you very much, Jaclynn. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
Have a great day.
Are you ready for liftoff? Don't miss Canada's #1 cannabis conference and trade show, Lift & Co Expo, coming this May 12 to 15 to Metro Toronto Convention Centre. Level up your industry intel at the Lift Cannabis Business Conference. Connect with movers and shakers from across the cannabis industry and preview new products and services from 250 plus exhibitors. Plus, everyone loves Lift & Co Expo's prizes, live music, and more. Visit liftexpo.ca for tickets. That's liftexpo.ca.
And I wanted to make sure that I commented on the fact that I got some answers to my question from last week. You may have remembered that I asked if anybody knew of any place where we could get a lab test done on THC and terpenes and such that wasn't ridiculously expensive. Because, I don't want to spend the world to do it. And I was really happy. In fact, I had 2 listeners who sent me the specific details. It's canvaslabs.ca, and I put the link at cannabispodcast.com. So thanks to Rocky and Brian for that. Really appreciate that, guys. And also a few other shout-outs to Becky, our Tweed rep. She's become a listener of the podcast of late. And a couple of new listeners as well, Randy and Jean-Sebastian. Thanks for coming along for the ride, guys. Always a pleasure to have you along. And now let's get to the final story of this week, and that is one that I still have a little trouble believing. The lack of legal cannabis in BC's access deserts is helping the illicit market thrive, say retailers. Now, this is a story from CBC, by the way. Across a large swath of BC's south coast, the Lizen area cannabis industry insiders have dubbed an access desert. It's a group of municipalities that 2 years after legalization still doesn't have legal cannabis retailers within its boundaries. I had no idea this existed. I guess I spend too much time in the Okanagan. I don't drive around the rest of the province. 12 municipalities: Whistler, West Vancouver, Richmond, Delta, Burnaby, Coquitlam, Pitt Meadows, Surrey, the Township of Langley, the City of Langley, Abbotsford, and Hope still don't offer local access to legal cannabis, according to the provincial government. Many in the industry say it's a problem that helps the illicit market thrive. Well, of course it would. If you can't access it in a legal store, you're going to call up your old dealer that you've been dealing with for years and say, hey, guess what I need? In BC, municipalities have the power to refuse to sell cannabis within their borders. The so-called access desert is frustrating to many in the industry, like the team at Burb, a cannabis brand with 3 storefronts in Coquitlam and Port Moody. From a business standpoint, economically, it's impacting us, said CFO and co-founder Stephen Dowsley. adding that his company is constantly running into closed doors with municipalities that lack the cannabis retail infrastructure. While operators in the industry can advocate to the different municipalities as often as they want, Dowsley says it comes down to each council's priorities and whether retail cannabis is even on the docket of files to tackle. But business aside, Dowsley says the whole point of legalization, to ensure that a safe, tested product is available to the public and the illicit market share diminishes, is being undermined by lack of access and prohibition. I think a city is doing itself a disservice, not just for the city itself, but for the constituents not having safe access to a product, he said. And Jaclynn Pehota, who you of course just met a few moments ago, the executive director of the Association of Canadian Cannabis Retailers, agrees that prohibitions against legal cannabis inadvertently drive consumers to the illegal market. Cannabis is being sold in these jurisdictions. That is the truth of the matter. Whether or not that access is regulated or not doesn't stop the activity from happening, she said. In 2019, almost 64% of cannabis users surveyed in BC said they acquired their cannabis from illegal sources, according to StatsCan. It's going quite swimmingly in the unregulated market, said Pehota. Those living in communities without local access can order cannabis products online from the provincial stores. However, the black market also takes a large chunk of the market share. CBC News reached out to the 12 municipalities without local access. Delta, Whistler, Pitt Meadows, and Burnaby didn't respond. Coquitlam, Hope, the townships of Langley and Langley City said they were in varying stages of introducing the framework needed to permit retail cannabis. The city of Abbotsford has already approved 4 applications. Richmond, Surrey, and West Vancouver have prohibitions on cannabis sales. I cannot believe we are still using the word prohibition in 2020 in British Columbia, the home of BC Bud. There's a little more to the story, and you can read the rest of it for yourself. Still unbelievable to me that there are 12 municipalities in the province of British Columbia that have not yet allocated retail cannabis stores. And definitely they are keeping the black market alive. Wow. And on that note, we find ourselves at the end of episode 61 of the Cannabis Podcast. If there is anything you ever want to comment on, like many people have done recently, send a note to info@cannabispodcast.com. If you ever want to check out any of the links that were talked about, you'll find those at cannabispodcast.com. And if you would like a reminder about when every episode comes out, subscribe to the newsletter, also at cannabispodcast.com. And that puts a wrap on episode 61 of the Cannabis Podcast.
From the cannabis-infused studio, high above the Okanagan Valley, this was the Cannabis Podcast.